Welcome to the latest edition of Broadcasting Today. This evening we'll be talking to Henry Bonsu, a former BBC journalist who now runs his own radio station, and Clive Edwards, who's the commissioning editor for BBC Current Affairs, all part of our mission here at Middlesex University in London to encourage students how to think, but also how to do. Welcome to the latest edition of Broadcasting Today. This evening we'll be talking to Henry Bonsu, formerly of the BBC and running his own radio station, and to Clive Edwards. Clive, who was a former editor of Panorama, now commissioning editor at the BBC, both with masses of experience in bringing television to life. Let me start with you first, Henry, though, because well, you in many ways are a very untypical BBC person, a bit like myself in many ways. And when you were young, and you graduated from Barling College, Oxford, with a fantastic degree in languages, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't fantastic, but it was a degree in languages.
And you decided to go into journalism when the world was your oyster. Why did you choose journalism?
It's because I didn't really know what else to do, to be frank, and this happens to quite a number of people. Initially, having done a languages degree, the obvious thing would have been to try and be an interpreter or a teacher, or to do something with what was then the European Community or the United Nations. But although I was a good student, I wasn't a brilliant student, and you have to be absolutely brilliant in the languages to have a crack at those jobs. But in my final year at university, wrote a piece about what it was like being of African origin from the north of England at Magdalen College, Oxford, which is one of the poshest, most rarefied colleges at that university, and the impact that the article, it was only about 600 words, had on the student body just really kind of blew me away, and I thought, wow, this is what I want to do.
Clive, you started in local papers, didn't you?
I started on the Sunday Post, which is a rather odd national... Well, we don't call it provincial now, it's a national paper for Scotland, but it was famous for printing good news stories only, so it was a completely bizarre place to start a journalism career. And in fact, every time you interviewed someone for them, that you would send the copy up to Dundee, and it would appear with Scottishisms in it. So everyone said, we this, and och either knew that. So it was really odd. And I decided after 4 years of that I wasn't learning anything at all, and went to the Birmingham Post and Mail, and there learnt real journalism.
What made you decide to come into television?
I was fortunate enough to be working on the London Daily News, which was the first paper I'd worked on where I actually believed in what we were doing, but it only lasted 6 months because Captain Bob closed it down at that point, and so being free to take a very short-term contract, I got a job with This Week, the Thames Television Current Affairs flagship programme.
Henry, I remember many moons ago, about nearly 20 years ago now, maybe longer, 25 years ago, walking along Broadcasting House corridor and looking into the Today programme and seeing you there, one black face amongst a sea of white faces. And it was quite a difficult environment to work in, I imagine, as a man of colour. Strangely enough, the issue of diversity has still not gone away. It still kind of haunts broadcasting, doesn't it?
Good word. It really does. It haunts broadcasting, it haunts many industries in this country, but especially those where, like with the BBC, we're a publicly funded body, and therefore there are responsibilities which are not faced by commercial television and radio. So LBC, for example, has never really had any black or Asian presenters. I think Krishnan Gurumurthy briefly at one point.
Of course, diversity is not just about black people, it's about women, about disabilities. Clive, do you think that the BBC, they've understood it clearly, they've understood the arguments, but have they got the mechanisms to try and redress some of those? Clearly, with women, they've done it. When we started in television 25 years ago, there was a dearth of senior women. Now, there's equity, pretty much, between men and women in senior positions. But do you think they've got the right mechanisms to try and get a better reflection? Not just the BBC here, ITV are the same, Sky are the same, better reflection of the community they serve.
Well, I think we're putting a lot of effort into doing that right now. I think behind the camera, women certainly have as many opportunities as the rest of the community. And we have, a number of women in extremely senior places. Controllers of both 1 and 2 are women. In front of the camera, obviously, there's been a very big debate, particularly the role of older women and the ability to continue to use them for longer, which we should be doing. I can at least say that one of our programmes, Rip Off Britain, has both Gloria Hunniford, Angela Rippon, and Julian, I can't even remember her surname. Somerville, thank you for coming in there. So at least in that sense, we're doing it. No, there's no question, we've come clean. There's a long way to go, both for women and for ethnic minority people to have a better career in the BBC. And, when someone on Today a few weeks ago said they came into the new broadcasting house and looked out at the newsroom and was shocked at how few black faces they saw, I was shocked too. So I went straight down there, looked around, and there were only 4 in the whole of that vast newsroom, and that, frankly, just isn't good enough.
What do you think the remedy is, Henry?
A whole range of remedies. I mean, for one, the industry, particularly the larger employers, have to be opened up. Because although the BBC used to boast that it advertised 30% of its employment opportunities, I'm not sure that's really, really true, and at what level. How are the average undergraduates or postgraduates, people who want to get into the industry, going to find out about these jobs? How are they going to know about these opportunities if it's not through word of mouth? Because at the moment, word of mouth and then The Guardian occasionally are the only portals in for most people. Other industries have opened up a lot more. It's a lot clearer and a lot easier for the people that I know who are now working in banking, in law, in medicine. It was a lot easier for them to get into their industries. And they're doing what I consider a far more socially useful job than any of us have ever done. If you're repairing somebody's heart, lung, kidney, whatever, or if you're defending somebody against trumped-up charges at the High Court, these are hugely socially useful jobs. What we do is important, but I think far more people can do a job in broadcasting, even as an executive, than can defend Baha Musa from Guantanamo Bay or whatever. Do you see what I'm saying? So why is it that we're now reaching a position in medicine where there's an overrepresentation of some diverse ethnic minorities, yet those same communities aren't able to supply, it would appear, similar numbers, or at least representative numbers, in broadcasting, which I think is far easier in terms of a discipline, both intellectually and in terms of the actual commitment and the demands made on an 8-hour or a 12-hour shift.
Now, you've spent over a decade outside the BBC,
Yep.
having spent a lot of your early career in the BBC.
Yeah.
Is it any easier on the outside than it was on the inside?
Well, I've gone from the mainstreams to the margins, and here's how I'll answer your question. I'm kind of working my way back to Auntie again. It's not a good look, but it's happening. Because what you find is when you're on the outside and you're trying to run your own business, either as a sole trader, freelance journalist, whatever, freelance presenter, MC, host of events and whatever, or as somebody working in a partnership or a limited company, you don't really have the infrastructure. You haven't got a guaranteed, what Mark Thompson, a former BBC Director General, called jacuzzi, remember that term, of cash. 3.6 or more billions of pounds. You've got to raise the money yourself. And if you don't, the bailiffs, believe me, guarantee this. They'll be at your door. And we've had to deal with bailiffs and others time and again. It means you can't get creative. You can't really compete. And one of the problems for broadcasting in this country is the way in which it's been set up, both in terms of commercial television, and commercial radio. So you can find yourself the tenant of an organisation like Global in radio, and also a competitor. And you're not going to win because they've got economies of scale. They've got so many different stations, 73 boiled down to about 8 or 9 stations, including the likes of Heart, LBC, Capital FM. How are you possibly going to take them on? And at the same time, they can charge you whatever they like to broadcast on DAB. And as a result of all of this, we recently discontinued on DAB. We're now an online-only station.
That's a radio.
Yeah, that's a radio. And when it comes to television, I spent a lot of time working for satellite television stations as a presenter, bit of producing as well. And although you're much freer and psychologically and spiritually more nourished in many ways, because in the BBC you can be nourished with the security, but psychologically and culturally you can find yourself starving in an organisation like that. but at the same time you can't do the job often to the best of your ability because you don't have the infrastructure, and often the people are not as experienced. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of working my way, not as experienced. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sort of working my way back to the BBC, sort of, but from a stronger base.
You think the ideas pool, I mean, you're a commissioner, are you seeing fresh ideas coming? You know, are you seeing new ideas, or is it the same old ideas and you get very...
I'm always looking for new ideas, so those are the ones that get through at the end of the day. I think the problem is training in some ways, is that it's easier to get in almost, because almost anyone, as you say, can pick up a camera or can go and work as a runner for an independent. But actually sustaining a long career, I think, is much, much harder, because it's harder to get a proper training and then a wide base of experience, and then have any way of moving, as it were, up. So, you know, there are a lot of people who are stuck at assistant producer, stuck at producer, whatever it is, because it's a shrinking, the BBC particularly is shrinking. It's very hard to move on. And in the indie world, you know, it gives you a lot of latitude to move around, but it's quite hard to establish a proper track record.
I think this is really crucial. I can just dive in again very quickly. One of the things I've noticed in my career is that it can be very, very hit and miss. You know, it's the pathways through the industry, up the industry, can be closed to some people, even though they're talented, but open to other people, purely because, for cultural reasons, they find it much easier maybe to connect with people at a particular level, to go and have lunch with people. So much of this business is about people, about personality, because there are many, many people, sometimes many, many more people at a particular level than the jobs are available. And I've noticed that there are some individuals who've had their careers championed, I mean, whether they're presenters or producers, and that's often very, very important. It's in other industries as well. It can be in the health service, see it in the police, it could be in barristers' chambers, where somebody looks at you and thinks, that's somebody, I'm tipping that person, I'm going to work with them, I'm going to help develop them. And they're having meetings all the time, lunching people, whatever. If you don't have that support structure, if you don't have people championing you, we call it role models these days, but back then people hadn't invented that term, you can find yourself just stuck doing the same job very well for 10 years, not understanding why other people who may look different, who may be men, maybe women, whatever, somehow they're almost rising without trace. Not to say they're without talent, but it's not clear to you why they're getting the jobs, why they are performing or deemed to perform better in interviews than you are. Nobody gives you the honest feedback that you need. Maybe the appraisal system has moved on since my day, but it really did need to. And so you can find yourself just wondering, is this really the career for me? And I think that BAFTA event called Diversify highlighted this. Over 2,000 people of varying ethnic minority groups leaving the industry over a 4-year period. That's incredible. And that partly is frustration. People don't know what it's going to take for them to move up through the ranks, because you can find yourself as a researcher for 10 years, assistant producer for 10 years with other people with no discernible extra talent. I mean, there may be things that they're doing you're just not aware of, but there may not be. And because so much of this is shrouded in, well, they had a lunch with this person, next minute they're on attachment on this program, then they've gone over here, gone over there, and you think to yourself, okay, well, here I am. We started at the same time. I think I'm doing pretty well. If I'm doing wrong, tell me, show me. And you don't often get the feedback you need.
I want to Clive.
Sorry, the one advantage in current affairs is that what trumps all of that is a good idea.
Yeah.
And if I get a really good idea from anyone, they can leap the queue, because
and
I
work
want
on
that
on
idea
the program.
and work on that program, and we'll make sure it gets made.
I'm wondering where the budgets, because I mean, when we made Faster Race 20 years ago nearly, that was not a bad budget. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was probably twice or 3 times the amount of money is available to a program maker who would make a similar program now. How much of budgets squeezed the ability?
I still think we have fairly generous budgets. I mean, it's less now than it was then, but that's because there are so many economies to be had, because you can self-shoot so much of it. And you can have a view about whether that's good or not, but actually for the industry it's been fantastic. It liberates you to make the sort of program that before, the kind of bring an element of old stock into current affairs that you couldn't have done before. And it's a lot cheaper. You can film for longer. So the budgets are less, but we do an awful lot with them. And we're still, talking a fair size amount of money. I mean, some of the new stations you were talking about will be making programs for Tuppence Halfpenny or whatever. Yeah. We're still talking about, 100, 120, 150,000 pounds for an hour.
So if a student from here would come to you, Phil there, for example, who's a very capable student, he came to you with a cracking idea.
Yeah.
You're saying that you still have the capacity to help young people work on their, even though they can't produce it or assistant produce it, to work on the idea. That
sure.
It's still, the capacity's still there.
I would never take away someone's idea from them, so there would be a role within the production. Whatever that role might be in terms of learning about it, all the rest of it. But a good idea is a good idea, and that's what I'm looking for in every day, in every proposal I get.
How do you think young undergraduates need to prepare themselves for a career in television? Because gone are the days of the training schemes, and the points of access, as Henry points out, are very varied. But still, if you want to get into the mainstream, you've got to crack that access issue, haven't you? And if you haven't been to the right university, so to speak, we know which ones they are, which have given you those connections.
Even when you do go, it doesn't necessarily mean a big advantage.
That's true. Yeah, sorry, I'll take that back. How do they navigate their pathway, do you think?
I think it is tougher now because there aren't those training schemes. There's no established way in. But at the end of the day, perseverance is everything, frankly, and getting any experience anywhere, anytime. I mean, for instance, I saw a CV today of a 24-year-old just finished out of City University postgrad, and I see lots of them. But the truth was, she'd done an awful lot in different places, working, no doubt, for free or for whatever across the piece. And she was persevering with me, so I thought, what the hell, I'll have a cup of coffee with you. You just have to keep on persevering all the time and never say no, and get that experience wherever you can get it.
Yeah. Henry, when I first met you, we were both young, of course, so we were both extraordinarily optimistic.
Yeah.
Are you still optimistic about the future of the industry? Because there is so much out there.
Yeah.
And there are so many more possibilities. You don't just have to rely on ITV and BBC anymore. There are so many more opportunities. What do you feel about the future?
I am optimistic because it's so much more multifaceted. If we didn't have this multi-layered universe, we didn't have lots of new entrants coming in, money coming from outside the country, then I'd just be depressed. I'd say shut up shop, because there are more and more people doing broadcast courses, in radio and television, and the employment base was shrinking. But if you're ambitious, if you're prepared to move, travel to another country. I mean, the other day, CCTV got in touch with a friend of mine asking her, and she's an ex-BBC, ex-Channel 4 person, to fly out and be part of their hub in Nairobi, paying a competitive BBC style salary. And she was thinking about it, but she's got other options. You don't have to only work at Television Centre. If you've got the ideas, having a diverse background can sometimes help as well. Being ambitious, but being prepared to take a risk is the thing as well. Being persistent, as you say. Then there are many opportunities. And looking at the BAFTAs last night, okay, this is film now, but it's an allied industry. The likes of Steve McQueen, Chiwetel Ejiofor, who I know and I've known him for years. I remember working away, getting paid tuppence halfpenny, treading the boards, doing kind of obscure plays, but honing his craft, cutting his teeth, becoming really, really, really brilliant. And even if it takes twice as long, you have to work twice as hard, as our parents always told us, then you have to be good and ready when the opportunity comes, as surely it shall. And that's why I'm still optimistic.
I also think students actually have to decide what kind of program you want to make and essentially stick with it. I mean, if you do want to come into my side, into current affairs, you've got to be a journalist, and you've got to have real experience of journalism, as well as being a good program maker, you hope. So if you're going to do that, you've really got to start at that and decide fairly early, because switching around later on is harder than it used to, harder generally, I think.
One of the early parts of the season, we had Roger Grafin. Roger said, there is a certain language and grammar of television. If you don't watch television, you'll never understand that. So you need to watch an awful lot of television to understand that to make your way in it? It seems an obvious thing to say, but there's so many other...
It's terribly important. I mean, a lot of people, I'm always surprised by the number of people who pitch ideas and clearly haven't watched the place, the channel they intend to target it at. So it's an all-purpose current affairs idea, and they've clearly never watched BBC Three properly or never watched BBC Two's different types of output. You've got to look at the output and decide, I'm absolutely going for that slot, and then you've got to be ruthless about the idea. Does it work or not?
Yeah. I would also say, learn how to pitch, learn how to present, not just on paper or online, but verbally. Because these meetings can be extremely pointy-headed and rigorous, can't they? We've all been, well, not all of us, but some of us have been in the Today programme meetings, Newsnight meetings, World at 1 and PM meetings during the days of Kevin Marsh, now head of the BBC College of Journalism, I think. And you don't get much time to capture people's attention in the room. And I remember on a couple of occasions trying to express myself, trying not to sound too left-wing, trendy Brixton agitprop, okay? And trying to drop my idea, bam, bam, like that. And I realised I had lost people's attention when I think it might have been Francis Harewood, the former deputy editor of the Today programme, just opened up his Daily Telegraph, crossed his legs, and just held it in front of my face. I've lost him. So I remember people were saying to me, Henry, you need to kind of understand the language that people use in these meetings. And this is something that's particularly important to those of you who haven't come from the classic middle to upper middle class background that many people who dominate television come from. There's a particular language, people articulate in a particular way, and you have to be able to present yourself, get to the point quite quickly, but make sure the idea has legs, so your story has a beginning, middle, and an end, so people go, I understand you. Really, really important.
Questions from the audience, please.
Yes, as
Just hang on, we'll get the mic into you so we can make sure we pick up your questions properly. Mic's coming in. Two mics coming in. Oh God, you're going to sound even deeper than me.
It's going to be in stereo, man.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
you just mentioned about class, and I think that's probably one of the, because ethnic minorities and women and LGBT have been very hard track to be represented within media recently, but as we've seen from things like Benefit Street and Skin, all those kind of shows, it seems that like demonisation of the working class is still a very big issue.
Yes, it is.
But it's not really, it doesn't feel like it's an issue that people within the mainstream are addressing, as you say, because it's so dominated by the middle class, who are very happy to attack, because at the end of the day, it is an attack on the working class. And it's very hard for someone from a working class background to move up through those ranks when the people who they're trying to impress have spent a very long time telling the rest of the world how they shouldn't be represented or shouldn't be approached in the same way that they are.
Yeah.
I think there are two separate things there, if I may say. I mean, the BBC wouldn't have made Benefit Street. Indeed, it was offered it and turned it down because it would never have been that brutal, in your face, whatever, about the subject of benefit, whatever one calls them, people on benefits continuously. We would have found a way to make it more human, more understanding, more compassionate, because that's what you should be. I think that's rather different. That's one thing. Then the other thing is the ability of the BBC and other places to employ people of all classes is a lot better than it used to be, but there are still far too many people of Oxbridge education, and that includes both of us.
Yes, indeed.
In the top of broadcasting, and that is a big issue. In some sectors, quite clearly comedy, well, actually I say comedy, and there was a row, I remember only a few weeks ago, about it was all middle-class Oxbridge comics as well. So maybe I'm wrong about that. But in some areas, entertainment, comedy, and in documentary, you actually see more people of all backgrounds than perhaps you do see in management and in even, dare I say, current affairs. So there's plenty to do, but I do think there's slightly different problems.
Although Henry, he did go to Magdalen College, but you came from a very ordinary background, didn't you, Henry? And so in a sense, that didn't help you out much.
No, it didn't.
One
of the biggest problems for me was knowing how to get in, because it's all very well having been to a college like Magdalen, but I didn't mix with the David Camerons and the Boris Johnson and all those people who are contemporaries of mine. I didn't know them. They were at Bullingdon Club and all these things. So although you're at a university, there's 13,000 people there. The people I mixed with were people broadly like me from a similar class background, often from the north of England, whatever. they didn't know what the pathways were. So I didn't know anything about BBC trainee schemes. I didn't read The Guardian, the Media Guardian on a Monday, with all the jobs in it. So when I finished, I ended up going back to Manchester and just training on a local employment training newspaper, which was for people who wanted to get into journalism, wanted to get into newspapers, but were from poor backgrounds. And they paid us £30 a week, plus bus fare. And I did that. That was from 1990 to 1991. But I got a portfolio out of all of that and got in touch with, I think, The Guardian and The Independent, and tried to resell stories from my newspaper, but for a national audience, and with the Voice newspaper as well, which is still going. And it was through that I built up a portfolio, and then heard about these BBC trainee schemes that all my friends, friends now, but not at the time, Jonathan Friedland, people who are really high up in The Guardian, Ian Katz, all contemporaries, they knew, because they were ahead of the curve, when they were at first year, second year, third year at university. They were running the university newspaper, Charwell, ISIS, I didn't know. I had no clue. So even though I was doing, German and French, reading about Goethe, Schiller, Kleist, etc., Brecht, I didn't know anything about the journalism of the day. I had no clue. And we've tried to, I think, demystify it much more in the 25 years since that period. But for many of us of particular backgrounds, when we leave university, we're still behind. We're behind already. And we're playing catch up thereafter.
Well, as it happened, I went in for the BBC training scheme
You
and didn't get it.
At least you knew it was there.
No, I knew I was there, but it was five
clue.
5 places for 5,000 entrants.
Yeah.
And one of the people who got it that year was, I believe, Lord Thompson's daughter, as it happened.
Okay.
But the fact was, I went off and did newspapers and found another way back in later.
Yeah.
So
the newspaper thing is very important, actually.
Yeah.
Really, really important, because some of the best journalists that the BBC certainly has ever had the privilege of working with have come from newspapers. They haven't necessarily had the traditional get into the BBC at 23, 24 years old and just work your way up and be there.
I think it's an advantage to have been in newspapers.
Yeah.
You actually see the world properly.
Yes.
It's much tougher and much more demanding.
Yeah.
And you learn the ropes when you're right up against it.
And even if you don't do that, if you don't manage to get in, because it's still quite difficult to get into newspapers these days, even your local newspapers, because people, when they get in, whatever their age they are, often with the local papers, they can be there for 25 years. So there isn't much churn. But there are so many different ways of getting yourselves noticed now, as I said before, writing blogs, tweeting, massing loads of followers, being relevant, going to television discussion shows. That's how Krishnan Guru Murthy was first spotted. I think it was called Open to Question or something like that. And he was asking all these questions, and then when John Nicholson was leaving the show, he said, I think that guy, that young Asian guy, should be my replacement. And that's how it started. And he was only about 19 years old at the time. So there are lots of different ways. Get yourself noticed, blog, write, whether it's letters to newspapers, make it really tight, cogent, closely argued. And then people might go, that's interesting, let's get that person on. Because loads of the people who get on 5 Live are people who've just sent in tweets or people who've just sent in texts.
Cool. A couple of questions, if I might. One was the interesting point Henry made about the way in which, in medicine, ethnic minorities seem to be professionalising well, and in the media not. And I suspect in television it's to do with the massive casualisation and lack of kind of staff jobs and maternity leave and so on that has dissuaded a lot of people, because the numbers are actually, it feels to me like it's going backwards.
Yes.
And connected to that, I wondered, a week ago Stuart Hall died, and as far as I know, there's been nothing on television, certainly that I've seen, about it. 20 years ago, there would have been a programme that night.
There would absolutely,
And that seems shameful to me.
Yeah. They did about a 4-minute chat with John O'Comfort on Newsnight. Jeremy Paxman clearly either had forgotten who Stuart Hall was or hadn't been fully briefed, or wasn't really that fussed and felt like it's just a little token thing about a guy who ceased to be relevant 20 years ago or whatever. So, and they interviewed John O'Comfort, and John is a brilliant filmmaker, but he's a lot better on film than he is verbally. So I was sitting there, it's killing me watching, because I know this Stuart Hall's a colossus, and there are lots of people that I could have put on if Newsnight had called me and said, Henry, would you have come on? I would have said, yeah, okay. I'm not the best person. And I just thought to myself, this is a shame, because this man is up there, the Hobsbawms of this world. He's of that era, of that stature. There was, I think, a retrospective on Radio 4.
Yeah, there was a Thinking Aloud.
There was Thinking Aloud, and a couple of people wrote, I think it was in the Independent obituaries and in The Guardian. But television, I think maybe BBC 4 might have done something. I would hope that they'll get to it. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty shocking. Yeah.
I'm not sure what to say to that. I mean, in terms of obituaries now,
Yeah.
for instance, we don't mark as many people, just to be practical about it,
Yeah.
because we're going to run them in the prime time on BBC One or BBC Two. They have to be big figures or world leaders to, I'm afraid, in this day and age, justify clearing the schedules for an obituary.
But nobody was asking the BBC to clear the schedules for Stuart Hall. Just reflect him on television somewhere. You
Sure.
know, apart from 4 minutes at the end of Newsnight with a presenter who didn't really know too much, and a guy who's better at expressing himself on camera, and he is kind of in a live television setting, and that's the problem. And this brings me to something else in television. Obviously, television it's a medium for the masses, still broadly. So the threshold has to be high before you decide to commit resources and time, whatever. The question is, what is the threshold, and does it move depending on what the dominant culture in television thinks is important? Because there are individuals, there are causes, there are sports that will get huge amounts of airtime and resources thrown at them, but that a tiny fraction of the population might be interested in. But because the dominant culture is interested in those things, it gets on. We have to constantly review what that threshold is and hold it to as much rigour as what you're saying.
Of course, it's ironic that Stuart Hall critiqued television.
Yes, he did.
And one of the things he talked about was the dominant narrative, and he
Yes.
became a victim of the dominant narrative, did
Yeah.
he not? Other questions?
Do you think it's harder for women over 40 who've just graduated to get into the BBC, seeing as there's not many over 50?
Well, as I said before, I think there are more women behind the camera than there were before. I think the truth is it's harder, full stop, because all careers nowadays and society is so youth dominated. And frankly, because to get in you have to work all the hours there are, probably for very little money, it's also harder when you're a more mature person, just because you may have other commitments. And you may not have quite as much energy as you did in your youth. You probably can't sacrifice quite as much. If you can, and if you have the ideas, I think it's still possible, but undoubtedly it's hard.
I would suggest one thing that somebody over 40, whether male or female, has is experience and the previous life. And I've noted a number of people who've probably got into television, usually not behind the scenes, because of course that tends to be initially a young person's game, having, for all the reasons you've outlined. But if they've had another career, if they've been a historian, for example, or they've been a scientist or been a police officer or whatever, these are experiences that have currency and have value, but it depends on how you present them. So if you have an idea, for example, and that idea has been gleaned and honed from direct experience, whether, for example, you're a parking attendant before you decided to come to Middlesex University, and you think the documentaries on parking attendants have been very, very unfair, they've been very myopic, but you have access and you have a narrative that you think would work really well on television and hasn't been done before, then you get in touch with Clive Edwards and say, I know this is true because I did that job for 10 years. And he will say,
Absolutely.
come on down.
Sure.
Well, cleaning
And
is
if
a
you-
good example.
Yes.
Cleaning formats all over the place. aren't
Yes, absolutely.
there?
So what's your past life?
Psychology.
Yeah, behind them. Yeah, go.
As an African myself, I've noticed that more and more African graduates are actually going back home, and because of and also people that even within acting, Chiwetel Ejiofor, for example,
Yeah.
he's more successful in America, and Idris Elba as well.
Yeah.
What do you think of the hiatus of British thought and Africans actually either going back to Africa
Yeah.
or trying their luck in America?
Well, it kind of links with what I was saying before. I mean, you know, the world is your oyster more and more now for a whole variety of reasons. And although London is a great world city, it can't accommodate everybody's talent, can it? You know, which is why we've seen the great success, not just from African or Caribbean British actors, but from white British actors going over to the States, doing far better. Africa, emerging markets, 54 nation states, plus Western Sahara. They need their independence too, of course. Okay, 1 billion people and rising. You know, soon it will be the cradle of the world's youth, and so that means, you know, potential jobs. And more of these other countries, like China, like India, they're investing. And one of the sectors they're investing in, the States as well, and the BBC, is television. The hub is no longer Johannesburg, from what I understand. It's now Nairobi. All these people, CNBC, they're all investing their resources and they're picking talent from all over the world, particularly African talent that may be in the UK or in the US or Germany, whatever, and coming back, so you have an advantage. So that's something you need to look at when you consider where you go on from here. Maybe the BBC, Portland Place, maybe Sky News or whatever, if there are ideas and you feel you can match those ideas to what people are asking for. But my God, I don't know which country your original one was, but I mean, which one is it? Somalia. Somalia, my God. I talk about Somalia and hear about Somalia all the time. Al-Shabaab isn't the only narrative in Somalia, is it? You know, there's a huge, I mean, they talk about brain drain. We now talk in development circles, because I'm part of that too, of brain gain. These are people who've got skills internationally. They're coming back to their countries of origin to help build it up, and there's a huge amount of optimism. You could be part of that wave.
Roddy.
Yeah, just picking up on what Paul's saying, what you're saying about the exodus of the black and minority ethnic people from TV. It's even before that, to be honest. I think there's an awful lot of young, ethnically talented, ethnically diverse people coming out of colleges and schools and being put off television from the off.
Yes,
you know, we're producing amazing graduates who are getting to a point and they look at television and they just kind of see the barrier there. And my mind is sort of goes back to Greg Dyke and his, you know, horribly white, which was how long ago now?
2000, I think it was.
I mean, that's a long time ago.
Yeah.
And the landscape seems to me, as Paul said, to be, you know, even worse, really.
Yes.
And I do think it is something to do with the way the indies work as well, because the BBC's getting a terrible hit.
No. I mean,
the
BBC's the best
Everyone should be here.
Yeah, boof. The Indies are terrible. Most Indies are terrible.
I think,
when it
in
comes to
my
that.
experience,
Terrible.
the Indies are far worse
Yes.
because they're not under the scrutiny and they're not being sort of regulated in the same way. I think in BBC News you are beginning to see faces pop up in correspondence roles and on radio as well, which is really, really good to see, and I think that seems to be bubbling under really, really well. But I suppose my point is, what can we do? You know, what can be done? 10 years, 14 years ago since Greg Dyke came up, painting this picture in some areas seems to be going, but in other areas just seems to be, you know, getting worse and worse. What practically can happen, you know, to stop this?
Well, the broadcasters have got to stop reinventing the wheel. I mean, they had something called the Cultural Diversity Network, then it became the Creative Diversity Network, and it kind of moved homes, didn't it, every 2 years. So the BBC would chair it for 2 years, Channel 4 would chair it for 2 years, Channel 5, and they come up with these pledges, the diversity pledges, and so people would have to sign up and say, we undertake to recruit in a broad representative way, but nobody really made it kind of a deal breaker. They wouldn't say, as a result of you not fulfilling this, we're going to remove the money from you. You have to get serious. Do what they did in the States, you know, contract compliance. That's one way, you know. But also you have to open up your recruitment and retention to scrutiny. First of all by yourselves, but also by others. Otherwise this is never going to work. And we'll keep getting Ed Vasey inviting Lenny Henry and all those people around for a chat, a 1.5 hour chat. Kwame Kwame, who lives in Baltimore now, you know, The Wire, he was, I think he did a big piece the other day in The Observer, didn't he? Kwame came over, he flew over for that, and he's thinking, what on earth did I fly over for? I think it was a 90-minute meeting. The first 45 minutes was dominated by 3 or 4 broadcasters saying, mea culpa, we're going to try and do better. And then the other 45 minutes was left to about 10 other people trying to get the minister's attention. It was a waste of time.
Is it about retention? Because recruitment, all the broadcasters have been very good with recruitment over the last 20 years. The real problem has been retention, looking after staff. You pointed it earlier on, didn't you? Pathways through somebody, you know, taking you under their wing and giving them support, pointing out to them when they're doing things wrong and when they're praising when they're doing things right. That's not actually the broadcasting way, is it? It's a very muscular, competitive environment where it's a survival of the fittest kind of culture. Do you think that's part of the issue, Clive?
Well, I think it is survival of the fittest. In a way, it's Darwinian, and you have to be prepared to fight for your corner. But I think we just need to be shamed, as we are being shamed, into action. And maybe it does need to be much more obviously affirmative or forceful. because that's the only way it will change. And while the BBC does get the brunt of the criticism, as you say, the trouble is that a lot of indies are being run on, frankly, free labour of all sorts, and that obviously discriminates against those who don't come from more privileged backgrounds of all colours.
Yes, indeed.
So the more we can flush it out, the more open the debate, the better.
And I think we've got to make sure that there are no-go areas, because, I mean, children's TV has always done pretty well in terms of representations on screen, because, you know, we know children just want to see somebody that makes them feel good when they're watching television. So children don't see race in that way, you know, which is why, you know, Floella Benjamin onwards, it's always been lots and lots of diversity on camera, and gender diversity too, sort of thing. But there are areas of broadcasting that are no-go, you know, including radio as well. If you walk the corridors of Radio 2, Radio 3, actually nearly all BBC radio, it looks like Britain, you know, do you remember The Hour in the 1950s? That's what it looks like, you know. And in television as well, there are silos which they're completely colour-free, you know. There are women there, but there are usually women of a particular class and background. There's I've met very few working class women in the areas of the BBC that kind of attract most attention. Very, very, very few. So the class thing is hugely important, but also let's subject those areas of the BBC and the other broadcasting areas that don't have any diversity at all, and there are many of them, to the same scrutiny as, you know, the blue-ribboned news and current affairs.
On that revolutionary note, which I would expect from you, Henry, I'd like to thank you both for coming along to Middlesex, sharing your wisdom and observations with students and staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much.